Dr. Ugo Perego, or Perego, how do you pronounce that? Perego? He has a PhD, I always get that wrong, I apologize. Like I said, my Italian is terrible. So, has a PhD in population genetics from the University of Pavia. He's been a senior researcher for the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation and coordinator for SNI in Italy. He is currently teaching science at the Southeastern Community College in Keokuk, Iowa. With his wife and 3 of his 5 children, they currently live in Nauvoo, Illinois. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Ugo.
All right. So, just for a change, I will be speaking about the Book of Mormon DNA, I guess. That's something different, right? I feel like a little bit like Elder Uchtdorf always talking about airplanes, right? I mean, that's kind of, we should change. But I do have a plan for something. My next project actually is going to it's not going to include DNA. So I will be speaking about Book of Mormon DNA studies. Why that right now? Well, the material that I will be sharing with you today actually comes from a forthcoming book that I had the pleasure to co-write a co-author with Dr. John Butler, who is the former director of the National Institute of Standard Technology. Is an incredible scientist, author of many forensic DNA textbooks used at many universities around the world. And he was the individual that was in charge of identifying the physical remains of the September 11 massacre. So he's quite a renowned scientist and remarkable individual, and I'm honored to call him my friend. So we work on this book together that will be published by Desiree Book. It's already been peer-reviewed, so we're just in the final stages for that, which is part of a series that you can see there on the screen that cover different difficult topics that are pertinent to LDS history and doctrine, and so ours would be just one of those volumes. So again, why DNA and Book of Mormon? Well, this is the, if you want to call it the hypothesis, right? The one that we are trying to, or at least see if there is a possible way to actually test this hypothesis. And the issue is that the Book of Mormon states that a group of migrants from the ancient Near East migrated to the Americas. Okay, we're all familiar with the story. However, recent DNA studies reveal that the DNA of Native American groups has Asian origins. Therefore, critics of the Book of Mormon states the Book of Mormon is not true. In fact, some critics of the Book of Mormon went as far as stating that DNA evidence against the Book of Mormon is the final nail in the coffin. Okay, there is no way out of it. Now, that's Mormonism, or the church should just close business and go and do something else, because we have finally found the final piece against it. However, there are also some specific rare DNA markers found in North America that look like they may have ancient Near East origins. And some individuals in the church think that that is evidence for the Book of Mormon to be true. So who is right? The critics, with the final nail in the coffin, DNA against the Book of Mormon evidence, or this other individual that state that DNA is actually evidence for the Book of Mormon to be true. Now, that is where the whole play takes place, is the origin, right there. This is Siberia, northeast Russia. Here is Alaska. And that is the place where those ancient migration would take place, which would have impacted the genetic makeup of Native American population, in addition to the story written in the Book of Mormon. So let me start with a number of key points that provides us, the framework for this topic. Okay, key point number 1, DNA testing is a powerful tool that can answer some specific questions when used within a proper framework. Due to limitations pertaining to genetic inheritance and population factors, DNA is not a magic wand that provides an answer for everything. Key concept number 2. Genetic ancestry and genealogy lineages are not equivalent. For example, full siblings have identical genealogy ancestry. Both share the same parents, the same grandparents, the same great-grandparents. Their genealogy is identical 100%. However, they differ pertaining to their genetic ancestry because parents pass different genes and traits to each child. About 50% of the DNA of siblings is in common. Genetics is the branch of biology that deals with the transmission and variation of inherited characteristics present in DNA. Genealogy, on the other hand, is the descent of a person, family, or group from an ancestor or ancestors' lineage or pedigree. Key point number 3. Population genetics is complex and involves results from both DNA markers and statistical models. DNA will not fill all unknowns and should always be considered in context with other information. Learning about the past works best with a multidisciplinary approach involving perspectives from anthropology, paleobotanists, linguistics, climatology, etc. Key point number 4. Ancestry informative markers, known as AIMs, are unique sets of DNA sequences that appear in substantial different frequencies between populations from different geographic regions of the world. These markers can be used to estimate the biogeographical origins of the ancestors of an individual. Typically, though, they're limited to large subcontinental divisions such as Africa, Asia, or Europe. They become less specific as we try to go to the sub-regional level. Key point number 5. Many questions people desire to be answered regarding Book of Mormon historicity are not testable with DNA. In some cases, there may be other tools available to test the hypothesis of Book of Mormon historicity, such as culture, language, etc., that are more effective than DNA to assist those interested in the topic. Key pieces of needed information are missing from a population genetics point of view, such as whether Lehi's family carried a common ancient Israelite DNA signature, or whether his family mixed with native population already in the Americas when they arrived. Key point number 6. Some people with personal interests, preconceived agendas, may oversimplify DNA results for their own purposes. Key point number 7. Data and data interpretation are not the same. The same data may be viewed differently depending on the approach taken to interpret this data. Data limitations exist, and when missing needed information, some questions simply cannot be answered. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is simply missing, which prevents anyone from completing the picture. And lastly, key concept number 8, scientific and spiritual approaches to an issue answer different questions. In my biology class, we start always every semester with what can be answered with a scientific method and with other questions that are legit questions, that are real questions that cannot be answered by the scientific method, such as questions pertaining to religion, morals, feelings. Can love be tested scientifically? So that is not that because the scientific method cannot be applied, that all the rest is not real. It shows that the scientific method itself has its own limitations. There is a book from the series of Let's Talk About by Desiree Book that was published last summer called Science and Religion by my good friend Jamie Jensen and BYU professor Seth Bybee. Jamie Jensen is also professor at BYU in science, and Seth Bybee is a professor of religion in BYU, and it's called Appunto Science and Religion, which could be a good reference for further reading on the topic. Okay, so let's get started more with some details about this, how the whole things work. So everyone has DNA. We should be familiar with that by now. We are in the 21st century. That is no secret. We received that from our ancestors. Our cells contain a genetic code made of deoxyribonucleic acid, also known as DNA, that provides a blueprint for life in a format much like a computer code. The diversity that we see in the world today results from the unique combinations of nucleotides, the building blocks of DNA found in every living organism. With the exception of identical twins, all humans differ from one another at the molecular level due to their unique genetic makeup. The application for and familiarity with DNA testing have increased in recent years. Since the late 1980s, forensic laboratories routinely use DNA to assist criminal investigations. Thousands of DNA tests are routinely run each month to establish the biological paternity of children. In the past 2 decades, many members of the general public have become familiar with DNA through genetic genealogy. You or somebody you know may have had your DNA tested in an effort to better understand your ancestry. Where did this all started? Well, on July evening in 1918, Bolshevik revolutionaries gathered the royal family of Russia of Tsar Nikolai Romanov II and his wife Alexandrina, and some of their support staff, their children too, and some of the support staff, into a basement room in Yekaterinburg, Russia, and brutally executed them. Fearful of a rival army that was en route, the executor took the body of the Romanov family and household into the woods outside of town and tried to further dismember and destroy the remains. After the Soviet Union dissolved, the burial site was uncovered in July 1991. Although 11 people were killed the fateful night 73 years earlier, only 9 schools were located among the almost 1,000 bone fragments recovered. Maternal relatives of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra provided reference samples to enable comparison of a marker called mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA results were recovered from these bones. Prince Philip, which is known as Queen Elizabeth's husband, was a maternal relative to the Tsarina, and so his mtDNA, his mitochondrial DNA, helped verify that the remains included Alexandra and 3 of her children. 1 of her daughter and her son Alexei were missing. Autosomal DNA, which is a different type of DNA testing on the remains, provided further verification of the family relationships. That's the article and the pedigree chart. This, by the way, was the first, in genetic genealogy, the first actual application of using DNA markers to connect families with each other. What do we learn from this? So when DNA can be recovered from human remains and known living relatives are available for reference purposes, relationships among family members can be verified using genetic markers. Notice there are certain things that need to happen for this to actually be done, okay? So that put this in the context of Book of Mormon DNA. That's what we're building here, trying to understand if these things that we can use for genetic genealogy can also be done or not for Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon migrants, or the Book of Mormon people. Case study number 2, Thomas Jefferson. A few days before the U.S. election in November 1998, the prestigious scientific journal Nature released an impactful study that used Y chromosome, which is yet another DNA marker, to try and answer a historical question. The study, titled Jefferson Father Slave/Child, was led by a retired physician from Charlottesville, Virginia, who had gathered DNA samples from male descendants of President Thomas Jefferson's uncle, Phil Jefferson, along with male descendants of Easton Hemmings, the last son of Sally Hemmings, who was an enslaved female at Monticello, which was the Jefferson residence. Now, there are no male descendants of Thomas Jefferson, as he had never had any sons, so that's why descendants from other family relatives were needed for this study. Thomas Jefferson, as I said, did not have any living male descendants, and therefore DNA samples from 5 individuals from another family line were used to establish the pertinent Jefferson Y signature. Additional DNA samples were also collected from male descendants of President Jefferson's nephew, Samuel and Peter Carr, who according to some family tradition had fathered children with Sally Hemmings, and someone named Thomas Woodson, who according to his family oral history claimed to be Jefferson's descendant. All of these samples were tested for this particular Y chromosome marker, and they were done by 3 prominent laboratories in Europe. The results found that the Hemmings line could not be distinguished, meaning that it was the same, from the Jefferson line, while the Carr and Woodson lines, which were this other potential candidate as potential fathers of this slave son, did not match. The article concluded, the simplest and most probable explanation for our molecular findings are that Thomas Jefferson, rather than one of the Carr brothers, was the father of Easton Hemmings Jefferson, and that Thomas Woodson was not Thomas Jefferson's son. In August 1807, when Easton Hemmings was conceived, President Jefferson would have been 64 years old and Sally Hemmings 34. What is the lesson we learned from this first, or one of these first cases? That despite media claims that have oversimplified the result, it is not been proven that Thomas Jefferson fathered children with Sally Hemmings. Rather, he is a possible father along with multiple male Jeffersons living in the vicinity at that time. Y chromosome testing has a limitation, as this information can only show a connection to a family line and not to a specific individual. Agendas can drive attitudes and actions beyond what the DNA results definitely demonstrate. Remember that the data and interpretation of that data are not the same thing. So genetic and genealogy, we say, are not the same. There is a fundamental difference between being genealogically or historically related to someone, either descendants or ancestors, versus being genetically related. Strong signals for specific segments of autosomal DNA are quickly diluted and lost within just a few generations. Therefore, even though written records may indicate a degree of relationship shared between individuals, this may not be supported by detectable genetic data unless it is a close relationship within a few generations. The only exceptions, as you can see from this chart, are the direct lines of Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, which survive many more generations. This is the DNA right here, autosomal DNA, which is diluted and disappear within about 5 or 6 generations. Population genetics is the study of inherited variation and its modulation in time and space. It is an attempt to quantify the DNA variation observed within a group or among different populations in terms, and here's some keywords, some scientific jargon, in terms of allele and genotype frequencies of specific DNA markers. What this means is that there are specific markers that are found among populations that can help understand the relationship between this population, but they are not unique to a single population and not found in any other populations. Significant variation can be observed within and between any group or species of organism at the molecular level. Important forces that influence genetic variation in population include mutation, natural selection, genetic drift, population bottleneck, founder effect, population size, immigration, emigration, and genetic admixture. Those are a lot of fancy words which basically underline the fact that the DNA of a population is not static, but changes over time due to a number of reasons. These genetic forces contribute to the frequency of specific markers present in a population and are central to the study of population genetics in all organisms, not just humans. All genetic markers are inevitably impacted. Mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, and autosomal DNA, which are the 3 markers used in population studies. Biogeographical ancestry, which are those fancy maps that you see when you have your DNA tested and they tell you where your ancestors come from. That's what we refer with biogeographical ancestry, short BGA, is often categorized at the continental level, for example, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asian, and Native American. These groupings are often inferred through the use of so-called ancestry informative markers, or AIMs. However, as has been noted, markers are not unique to a specific population. Rather, ancestry markers of interest are found at higher frequency in some populations and at lower frequencies in others. Thus, the presence of a particular aim does not prove a population source for all ancestors of the individual tested. An example of evaluating self-declared ancestry from several U.S. population groups found that a mixed individuals traditionally self-classify in a biased way and toward only one of the parental group involved in their mixture process. We did in the past several studies on groups from Central and South America, which clearly had a strong genetic ancestry from Native Americans. But because in their culture having Native American ancestry is not deemed as a cool thing, then they emphasize their ancestry from European admixture, as in Spain, Portugal, England, Germany, and completely omit the reporting of their Native American ancestry, although that's what the DNA states. Now, just want to go back a couple slides. What you can see here is an example using simple colors of how you would find the same markers among different populations, but in the pie chart, the slides vary in size. So it means, if you have red markers, okay, the markers that are color identifying red in this pie chart, you can see that they are also found in other populations, but in either more or a higher or a lower frequency. Scientists attempting to study the past examine DNA from ancient and modern samples obtained from various population groups around the world. This genetic information is then used in a multidisciplinary approach alongside data from archaeological findings, linguistics, and other fields in a combined effort to understand human origin and expansion routes followed by our early ancestors. This work typically paints human history with a broad brush. The level of resolution from the majority of this scientific study is often general and not specific, as it focuses on unrecorded events that took place thousands of years in the past. In other words, we do not have documents to corroborate the genetic evidence. We are left with the interpretation of the genetic data. So what about the Book of Mormon? We can set easily unreasonable expectation when we ask the Book of Mormon to deliver something to us that it was never meant to deliver. Some people may even create unfounded stories based on traditions and assumptions that are not in the text or are unsupported when considered in context of other information. Critics who express concerns about whether the Book of Mormon is historical in nature using DNA evidence typically assume a population demographic model based on an empty American continent at the time when Lehi's family arrived, and consequently, they inflate the idea that the Book of Mormon purports to be the records of all former inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere. The Book of Mormon never claims to be a description and history of all the peoples who lived in ancient America. Its title page states that it is a witness of Jesus Christ recorded and abridged by prophets of God who mostly are within a single family lineage. These prophets recorded what they have personally experienced or learned from revelation and from other records in a fashion similar to the accounts found in the Old and New Testament, where the narratives and teachings are geographically and temporally confined to where and when each writer lived. Additionally, it is common belief among members of the church that the small plates of Nephi, which were included by Mormon with the abridgment he made from the large plates of Nephi for a wise purpose, were preserved to fill the gap in the Book of Mormon narrative that was caused by the loss of the 116 pages in the early stages of the translation process. However, this is only partially true, as stated by Nephi himself when he made a distinction between spiritual and temporal content in the small and large plates, respectively. Nephi's large plates and small plates both begin their accounts in Jerusalem with Lehi's family around 600 BC. Following Nephi's initial record keeping, these sets of plates appear to have been kept separate for different purposes until united with King Benjamin around 150 BC, more than 450 years later. There is as much history that is missing in the Book of Mormon that would have been found in the 116 pages, 450 years of early Nephite history. The small plates seems to be more like a family Bible for Nephi, with record keepers concerned about space running out, whereas the large plates were kept by kings and royal records keeper as official government records. Like taking two different routes, as we can see here in the slide, to the same destination, the large and small plates of Nephi went through many different record keepers with different perspectives and experiences about their separate journeys until they were eventually reunited dozens of generations later by the prophet Mormon, as he narrates about King Benjamin. It may be helpful to point out that 450 years is almost twice the amount of time since the United States was formed, or to make it more feel like a more local event, is 3 times the amount of time since Italy was unified. Okay, so that's a long time. Interaction with other people would likely not have been a current issue for record keepers after 450 years, and Nephi would not have covered this topic in the small plates. Even if the large plates had information about interaction with others, we do not have this information now. Therefore, we are trying to draw conclusions from information that is not available in the text. From the small plates, we have very limited information from which to infer population dynamics. For example, were there others who traveled with Lehi's group beyond those mentioned in Lehi and Ishmael families? We know that from 2 Nephi 5 that a division occurs between the followers of Nephi and Laman, yet we do not know anything about the relative numbers of these two groups. Nor do we know anything about the possibility of these groups interacting with other people already there in the New World. Simply put, we do not have the necessary details to test potential scientific hypotheses about the Book of Mormon people. Part of the problem in this whole contrived controversy is the oversimplification of results from DNA studies that are being conducted by scientists in an effort to examine potential patterns of human migration throughout ancient history. This oversimplification is in many ways similar to the impact that the popular TV show CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, has had in recent years on forensic laboratories. In the name of entertainment, the CSI television shows have created a perception in which the general public now thinks that forensic scientists go to a crime scene, work in fancy and well-equipped laboratories, question suspect in a case, and obtain conclusive results on every complex case in a matter of a few minutes. The truth is that scientists work in poorly supplied laboratories, are underpaid, and in many situations have large backlogs of samples that prevent rapid responses to new individual cases. And we're not as good looking as those people in the shows as well. But in addition, forensic scientists never interrogate the suspect of a crime, and many cases are never solved. The public perception of CSI has now created an expectation in many juries that DNA evidence should be present in every case. Even with this oversimplification of its portrayal of forensic laboratories, there is some truth within the set of the CSI shows. For example, the instruments on the TV shows are real. However, they do not collect data and generate results as rapidly as portrayed, nor are complex cases solved so succinctly. Likewise, oversimplification of DNA results and what they are capable of revealing in examining the authenticity of the Book of Mormon has been greatly exaggerated by critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. DNA testing results from modern Native Americans do not negate the possibility of Book of Mormon people having existed anciently on the American continent. Now, for the I'm going to mention 6 major misconceptions that are frequently used by critics of the church. I have discussed this in the past. They're available on other articles that I wrote. They're available online or YouTube videos. So I will not spend time explaining each one of them, but I feel like it's a good time right now to mention them, and they will be in the forthcoming book as well. Misconception number 1, the absence of Israelite DNA. This is a misconception. This is not what I'm saying, okay? So misconception number 1, the absence of Israelite DNA is evidence to the Book of Mormon that the Book of Mormon is not historical. Not true. Misconception number 2, the Book of Mormon tells the history of all indigenous people of America. Also not true. Misconception 3, when Lehi and his family arrived in the Americas, no one else was here. Also not true. Misconception number 4, if scientists can obtain DNA from a 70,000 years old Neanderthal, surely they could find Israelite DNA in the Americas from 2,600 years ago. 2 completely different approaches. Misconception 5, DNA cannot just disappear. Well, it does. So that's another misconception. Misconception number 6, we know what Israelite DNA looks like, and therefore we should be able to find it in the Americas if it was ever there. That is assuming we know what Lehi's and his family DNA was, which we don't. So that is also wrong. Let's talk for a minute about this other idea that there is DNA in America that supports the Book of Mormon historicity. This is referred to as a marker known as mitochondrial DNA X, more specifically X2A. So what do we know about this? Well, there is a rare DNA maternally inherited marker found among some Native Americans, mostly from the Great Lakes area between the US and Canada. This is, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, in that area right there, okay? This marker is called X2A, and it characterizes specific mitochondrial DNA lineages. Similar but not identical mtDNA X2 lineages are also found in the Old World, as you can see here. This is the Great Lake area. This is the Native American X2A. And right here are found some similar but not identical X2 in the Old World. The presence of individuals in North America with mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X2A, while interesting, does not provide any direct evidence for the Book of Mormon. This is due to a number of questions about current and ancient populations that we cannot fully answer at this time, particularly the reference haplogroup for Lehi, Mulek, and others who may have come with them to the New World. Most importantly for this discussion, X2A is not viewed by scientists as some kind of Israelite marker. So it seems that only those that want that to be an Israelite marker sees it that way, but no one else does, especially those that know something about it. And just as an open parenthesis, I've done probably more DNA tests on X2A samples than any other individuals on the planet, as that was part of my PhD dissertation. What do scientists... This is it right there. What do scientists claim regarding the meaning of X2A in North America? Professor Jennifer Raff from the University of Kansas Department of Anthropology and Professor Deborah Bolnick from the University of Texas at Austin Population Research Center shared the following in a 2015 article titled, "Does Mitochondrial Haplogroup X Indicate Ancient Transatlantic Migration to the Americas? A Critical Revaluation." Seems like they're addressing in particular this issue that some Latter-day Saints feel like this marker is proving the Book of Mormon to be true. This is a direct quote from their article. The presence of X2A in North America has been cited as evidence for two different transatlantic migration before European contact. First, Meldrum, and some of us know that name, but they mention him. First, Meldrum and Smoot suggested that X2A is the result of an ancient Hebrew migration from the Middle East to North America approximately 2,500 years ago. This hypothesis is undermined, though, by four key findings. X2A is not found in the Middle East. None of the X2 lineages present in the Middle East are immediately ancestors to X2A. The date of coalescence, which is the date where two lines come together in the past, for X2A dates to about 14 to 17,000 years ago. Significantly precedes the hypothesized migration from the Middle East. And they actually quote me in that one, but I'm not going to say that. And haplogroup X2A was present in North America far earlier than the hypothesized Hebrew migration, having been found in this man, the Kennewick man, that is 8,000 years old using carbon dating. So haplogroup X2A was present in North America far earlier than the hypothesized Hebrew migration. Thus X2A does not provide any evidence for an ancient Hebrew migration from the Middle East to North America. This is a direct quote from these two scientists that are not in any way involved with the Latter-day Saints issue of Book of Mormon historicity. They're just looking at this particular market. In conclusion, science is an important and valid method of gaining truth and knowledge. As we use the scientific method to seek learning, it is important to always keep in mind what questions we are trying to answer. While science develops our understanding of how things work, religion answers questions surrounding why life matters. Here are some few points. We are unsure of the Book of Mormon people details lineage and relationship to other people anciently. The gene pool of today in the Middle East is vastly different than 2,600 years ago when Lehi left Jerusalem. 3. There were probably other groups of people present in the Americas that are not referred to in the text of the Book of Mormon. And number 4, no reference samples for comparison purposes means no reliable conclusions. Without reference samples for comparison purposes and a full understanding of the genetic past, no valid comparison on this issue can be made through testing modern human groups. While it is possible to speculate endlessly about scenarios that would make Book of Mormon storylines compatible with current DNA evidence, the record itself is simply not descriptive enough to provide definitive calibration points with which to make confident scientific conclusions. Thus, we are left where we started and where I believe the Lord intended us to be, in the realm of faith. A spiritual witness is the only way to know the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. Although DNA studies have made links between Native Americans and Asians, these studies in no way invalidate the Book of Mormon despite the loud voices of detractors. Despite numerous technological and scientific advances in the intervening years, the fundamental principles of population genetics, including how they could possibly relate to the migrations described in the Book of Mormon, have not changed. Definitive proof of the Book of Mormon's authenticity comes in the Lord's laboratory of spiritual revelation. A book from God must be confirmed by him in his own way. We are asking Moroni 10:4 to experiment upon the word, to study, think, pray, and do. If we expend the same time and energy in this kind of examination as we might do to conduct a careful scientific study, the answer will be clear and our conviction will be firm and unchanging. Thank you.
So, Ugo, it seems like you've made two groups of people angry now because you told the critics that they're wrong.
It's been for a while.
It's been for a while. I mean, you told the critics that they're wrong, and then you told, I mean, I was just on X, on Twitter, just last week, and they said haplogroup X proves the Book of Mormon is true. So, you know, I guess where could we go from there?
Well, I can use this one, right?
That one, yeah.
It's simple. I mean, I said it more than one time that there are big holes that are not filled by science and are filled by individuals that would like these holes to be filled, right? So they're filling these gaps with speculation, with unsupported evidence, with preconceived idea, just because they want their story to be as strong as possible. Now, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. You know, if I see evidence B, and evidence C, then I can draw my own conclusion of that. But one point that I'm trying to make, and that we, you know, with John Butler, we're trying to make in this book, which is something that maybe has not been emphasized enough in the past, is that one thing is data, which, by the way, all the data that both critics and those in favor of Book of Mormon historicity, they have never produced a single piece of data themselves. It's all about borrowing scientific work from other people that were not trying to test the Book of Mormon. So completely different hypotheses, completely different studies built, you know, in a way that were testing other hypotheses. And yet this data or conclusion have been extrapolated to address a question that was not the question in the original works, in the original scientific work. And so what we're trying to help people understand again, and this is, you know, Brother Erickson that spoke earlier will confirm, is the same thing with history, with historical data. You know, you have a letter here and a journal entry over there, and then there is a gap in there, you know, and you can fill the gap, you know, based on how you feel about the specific topic. If you have angry feelings about who is that you're studying, it could be Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, then you will fill those gaps with negative material and make the evidence part of, not the supporting foundation of your preconceived feelings and notions. And likewise, if you're a big supporter of Abraham Lincoln, you tend to look only at the good things that happen and dismiss everything else. And that's happened the same with science. It's a data and interpretation of the data are two different things. And what we're dealing with both critics and supporters is mainly an issue of interpretation of data, which the data per se does not state what they're stating.
And they didn't do the data, they didn't do the research, they're just taking it out of
That's just a
context.
minor little problem, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's another question. So DNA says hi. So DNA tests say that we can see from a specific place, like 1% Africa, 5% Sweden, stuff like that. Are they all a waste of money? If you want, you can see it in the original Italian too.
Yes. So are those biogeographical or genetic genealogy tests a waste of money? They're definitely easy to see. They're fancy, and they tend to lure people into buying this test. Is this sad in some ways, because there is a lot more potential information that is not fully utilized, which is the capability of those tests to actually find unknown relationship, finding unknown genetic cousins we talk about. But it's not that they're wrong, it's that as you go and you hope to focus on a more specific geographic region, that margin of error increases. And so you lose specificity the more you're trying to focus. So accuracy, in fact, there are certain companies that tell you how speculative do you want to see your result. And there are different, you can move your mouse and decide, well, I want to be absolutely sure, and then, well, it's gonna tell you you're European. And it's like, well, that's not exciting, I know I was European. So then you're gonna go and increase the speculation part, and you're gonna start seeing, oh wow, now you're Italian, but 40% confidence that you are, so it really depends on what is it you want to see, but then you lose the accuracy. So it's not a waste of money completely, just have to take them with a grain of salt.
So I'm going to, just a comment, that's the end of the questions. So my father was also a biologist, although he was into plants. And he felt that you could use a scientific method, of course, to prove the existence of God. And he quoted this frequently with his students. He said, first you create a control universe where there is no God, and then compare it with our universe where there may or may not be one, and see what the difference is. And so that was his solution.
And it's a good comment. Personally speaking, the more I study science, and the more you cannot take out the presence of a creator in there. In fact, when I talk with Latter-day Saints scientists, one of the common names that you don't hear in the temple refer to God is the great scientist. Is not taking things out of a hat, is using natural laws. The Doctrine and Covenants is full of these references, how God uses natural laws spiritually and physically to make things happen. We just have not fully grasped, understood, mastered everything. Be interesting to change water into wine or wine into water. Probably that's what we want to do, but we don't know how to do that completely and fully. But just using our priesthood. But there is chemicals that can do that.
He did say the more he studied the science, the more he believed in God because of the beautiful
harmony
and the way the DNA splits and recombines and the photosynthesis cycles and things.
The speed and the accuracy of what happened at the cellular level is mesmerizing.
Yes. Thank you very much.
All right, no problem. Thank you.